If you ask any Nigerians in their 60s how life used to be, they'll tell you stories that sounds almost unbelievable. They'll tell you how going to school wasn't just free. Sometimes it felt like they were being paid to go. Before they even finished their exams, they were being begged to fill out employment forms. How they were given allowances for buying a car or starting a business right after school. They'll tell you about a time when opportunity seems to just land in your laps, when life in a way was made easy for them. This wasn't a fairy tale, and it certainly wasn't a myth. It was the result of policies and vision, mostly from three men: Sir Ahmadu Bello in the north, Chief Obafemi Awolowo in the west, and Dr. Michael Okpara in the east. Each of them had different approach, a different philosophy, but all of them believed in one thing: welfareism. They were tied together by a single vision: to lift their people, to give them a chance, to provide opportunities that will shape generations. But how did this crumble? How did Nigeria go from the hope of Africa to the failed state it is today? This is the story of the single event that broke Nigeria. At exactly midnight on the 30th of September 1960, a small circle of rising Nigerian elites were glued to their radios, the same way a devout worshipper holds a prayer beat. They waited, tense and excited, as the calm voice of Emmanuel Omotsola, one of the finest broadcasters of his time, came through the airwaves from Racecourse. Nigeria is now a free, sovereign nation. The joy that erupted in Lagos, the then center of power, was something you could almost touch. People poured into the streets. Others stayed glued to their radios, cheering, singing, shouting, celebrating. And it wasn't just Lagos. Across the country, from the biggest towns to the most distant villages, people marked that night in their own ways. Food was flowing, drinks were passing from hand to hand, and for just that one night, everybody allowed themselves to believe that the future would be theirs. Finally, the black man was free. This was the last checkpoint of Africa's journey to dignity and self-determination. For the first time, the black man could take control of his own future and destiny. And even though there was a flurry of independence happening all over the continent, this one seemed different. Nigeria, due to its immense and incomparable human capital, material and natural resources, was regarded as the one to emancipate and restore the dignity of Africa and the black man in general. It was supposed to be the real-life Wakanda, and it actually got off to a very good start thanks to these three wise men. Nigeria at the time was made of three regions: north, west, and east. Each region had a lot of power to run its own affairs, like education, health, and local government. The federal government handled things like defense, foreign relations, and currency. Think of it like three almost independent mini countries under one roof. Each region was headed by a premier who controlled most aspects of government within their territory. Sir Ahmadu Bello ran the north, Chief Obafemi Awolowo and later Ladoke Akintola ran the west, and Dr. Michael Okpara ran the east. They could decide how they developed their region, schools, industries, and social programs, largely without interference from the central government. Awolowo, through his democratic socialism, wanted a society where people could live decent lives, where the government made sure you could get education, healthcare, and the basics you needed. A place where everyone had a fair chance, no matter where you came from or who your parents were. He used money from cocoa to fund free education and basic healthcare for children up to 18. He pushed rural development and invested heavily in infrastructure. He supported a mixed economy. The government handled key industries, but private businesses were allowed to grow, and he backed it up with real projects. He built Nigeria's first university teaching hospital, UCH Ibadan, in 1957. He launched Africa's first television station, Western Nigerian TV, in 1959. He built the Liberty Stadium in 1960, one of the first modern stadiums in the region. And he built Cocoa House, which was commissioned by Akintola in 1965, the tallest building in West Africa at that time. And he achieved all this without oil money. Meanwhile, the North had a completely different story. Before the British came, the North already had a full Islamic civilization, its own schools, laws, currency, and political systems. But the Western education in Nigeria came through missionaries, and in many places, you were required to take a Christian name or convert to Christianity to get educated. Northern leaders saw that as an attempt to Christianize their society, so they held back. Over time, this resistance meant the North didn't adopt Western schooling as fast as the South, which accepted it earlier. Sir Ahmadu Bello, then Premier of the North, recognized the region was behind in Western education, so he launched the modernization agenda, pushing for schools at every level: primary, secondary, vocational, and even universities like Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. The goal was simple: create skilled Northerners who could run their region. He paid people to go to school and prioritized hiring Northerners. He also used income from cash crops like groundnut and cotton to build industries and boost the economy instead of just exporting raw materials. He built textile mills, oil mills, road and rural service to make agriculture profitable and easier, and his policies worked. They eased suspicion about Western education among Northerners, got local leaders involved, and created North's first generation of educated professionals and leaders. At the same time, healthcare, market, road, and agriculture all advanced, raising living standard across the region. Just as Ahmadu Bello understood the North needed skills and people to run itself, Michael Okpara knew the East had to build its own strength too. He believed real development came from growing agriculture and industry, not just selling raw materials abroad. Through a system he called pragmatic socialism, Okpara set up large farms and produced palm oil, food crops, and cash crops on a big scale. He also pushed agro-processing and built factories, industrial estates, and manufacturing plants like the Trans Amadi Industrial Area in Port Harcourt, so the region could make more of its own goods. But he didn't stop there. Schools, technical centers, health facilities, and public services spread across towns and villages. Okpara showed it was possible to build a modern, welfare-oriented industrial state without relying on oil revenue. All three regions were thriving and everything was looking promising until cracks started to appear at the federal level. At the time, Nigeria used the Westminster-style system. That meant people didn't vote directly for the prime minister. They voted for representatives in their regions, and the party that won the most seats got to choose the prime minister. Since the bigger region had more representatives, the system naturally favored the most populous region, which sets the stage for the first fracture in the system. Population count, representation, and balance of power will soon create tension across the country. The tension came to head with the national census. In 1962, Nigeria tried to count its own people for the first time since independence, but controversies exploded. Nigeria counted roughly 45.26 million people, 22.1 million in the north, 23.25 million in the south and other regions. However, northern politicians claimed their number were undercounted, while southern leaders applauded the result. The disagreement was so heated that the Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, cancelled the 1962 census and set up a new board to do it again. The 1963 census went ahead. The new census put the population at 55.65 million, with the north at about 29.8 million, the east at 12.4 million, and the west at 13.5 million. Although some eastern and midwestern leaders still rejected it and took the matters to court, the results were accepted by the federal government. Those were the numbers used to divide the representation, assign political power, and determine resource allocation, and they made it very clear that the North held the numbers. While tension over population and representation were building, a separate turmoil was unfolding. In 1962, the federal government accused Obafemi Awolowo, the iconic leader of the Western region, and several other Western politicians of treason. Awolowo's British lawyer was not allowed into the country during the trial, which eventually led to his sentencing to 10 years in prison. In 1965, Nigeria had 4 regions: North, West, East, and Midwest. The election was to choose representatives for the federal house, and the prime minister will come from the party with the most seats. Fraud, intimidation, and violence marked the election, especially in the West. Awolowo's action group had split, and local authorities used police and legal tricks to suppress oppositions. In the North, the NPC controlled the region, making results heavily skewed in their favor. Riot broke out in Lagos and Ibadan, with ballots burned and 100 killed. In the end, the Northern Alliance dominated, winning 198 of 312 seats, 162 of those by the NPC alone. The Western and Eastern parties, including the fractured AG and the NCNC, won only 108 seats combined. This election deepened mistrust between regions and showed how regional power manipulation and population advantage could shape Nigeria's politics. It also weakened civilian authority and set the stage for the January 1966 coup. A group of frustrated Southern soldiers saw the political process as irredeemably corrupt and took matters into their own hands. On 15 January 1966, a group of mostly young Eastern officers attempted a military coup that left the Northern Premier Sir Ahmadu Bello, Western Premier Samuel Akintola, Prime Minister Sir Bokar Tafawa Balewa, and several senior Northern officers dead. Most Eastern leaders, including the ceremonial president Nnamdi Azikiwe and the Eastern Prime Minister Michael Opara, were spared, sending a signal that it was an Eastern attack on the North. In the aftermath, Acting President Dr. Nwafor Orizo handed power to the army. Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, the general officer commanding the Nigerian army, stepped in and assumed control. The coup wiped out the political class that understood and promoted regional-based welfare and federalism, effectively destroying the system that Bello, Okpara, and Awo had built and paving the way for centralized power and long-term dysfunction. After the coup, Major General Aguiyi Ironsi abolished the federal system with Decree 34, turning Nigeria into a unitary state. Regions lost their economy, the civil service was unified, and the fiscal power shifted entirely to the center. This move killed the foundation of both Awolowo's welfare model and Sir Ahmadu Bello's regional development system, which relied on regions controlling their own resources. Oil revenue, about to explode, now become centrally controlled, and the logic of regional-based welfare died overnight. In July 1966, just 6 months after the first coup, a group of northern officers carried out a counter-coup, killing General Aguiyi Ironsi and installing 31-year-old Yakubu Gowon as the head of government. Gowon attempted to restore federalism on paper, but in practice, the government remained highly centralized. He created 12 states, breaking the old regions, but revenue allocations and military commands were firmly controlled from the center. State became administrative unit of the federal government, with uniform laws and commissioners appointed from above. The military structure made regions financially dependent and ended the possibility of region-driven development. Under Gowon, welfare became nationalized but underfunded. Northern or western regions could no longer fund their own schools, hospitals, or local projects. Everything depended on the federal purse, and increasingly on oil revenue. The regional welfare and development model that Bello, Okpara, and Awolowo had pioneered was effectively dead, and centralized control over resources and governance became the permanent framework for Nigeria. The discovery of oil in Ologbiri in 1956 marked a turning point in Nigeria's economy. Before oil, agriculture, cocoa, groundnut, palm oil, and rubber was the backbone, providing most income and employment. By the late 1960s, oil became the main export, and after 1973 Arab-Israeli war quadrupled price, Nigeria benefited massively as a new OPEC member. Under Gowon, oil revenue funded ambitious projects, roads, refineries, steel plants, universities, new states, and public administrations. Civil service expanded, salary rose, and the federal government became the country's largest employer. Oil production soared from about 400 barrels per day in 1966 to over 2 million by 1974, soon accounting for 80% of government revenue and 96% of foreign exchange. But the boom also reshaped the economy and society in risky ways. Agriculture's share of GDP fell from 60% in 1966 to under 25% by 1980s. Manufacturing remained dependent on import, while cheap oil and foreign goods encouraged consumption over local production. Industries grew, a new upper middle class emerged, but rural areas were largely left behind. Public sector's job and petrodollar encouraged corruption, abandoned projects, and weakened entrepreneurship. Nigeria became heavily dependent on oil, setting the stage for a long-term economic vulnerability, a classic resource cost crisis. By the early 1980s, global oil price collapsed. The decade of easy money ended overnight. Nigeria's revenue crashed, and the country finally saw how weak its oil-dependent economy really was. During the boom years, government spent freely, borrowed heavily, and abandoned the sectors that once sustained the country. Agriculture had died, manufacturing was shallow, and almost every part of the economy depended on imports. Once the oil price fell, the entire system buckled. The strong naira that made import cheap during the boom now became a cost. Local producers could not compete. Foreign exchange disappeared. Debt piled up and inflation climbed. By the mid-1980s, Nigeria was trapped in a full economic crisis with no savings, no fallback sectors, and a bloated public service it could no longer afford. This was the environment that produced the Structural Adjustment Program in 1986. Under General Ibrahim Babangida, pressured by the IMF and the World Bank, the government introduced a neoliberal reform package meant to fix the crisis. The policies were straightforward: devalue the naira, open the economy, remove price control, privatize government companies, and cut subsidies and public spending. The goal was to revive agriculture and manufacturing, reduce dependency on oil, and push Nigeria toward a private sector economy. But the reality on the ground was harsh. Devaluation triggered high inflation. Removing subsidies pushed up living costs. Privatization concentrated public assets in the hands of connected elites, and shrinking the public sector threw many people into unemployment. Poverty deepened, wages collapsed, and everyday life became harder. SAP exposed what the oil boom had hidden. Nigeria built prosperity on one commodity and ignored everything else. The boom brought money, roads, schools, and rapid urban growth, but it also produced dependence, waste, corruption, and a fragile economy that could not stand when oil price fell. If Nigeria had used its oil well to industrialize and built a strong production sector, the boom could have changed the country permanently. Instead, it became a cautionary story about what happened when a nation relies on resource wealth without discipline or long-term planning. Nigeria never truly recovered from the collapse of the 70s and 80s. The wound never healed. The structure that broke never got rebuilt. And the kind of leaders who shaped the early regions, people driven by ideas and long-term plans, disappeared from the stage. Today's political class is the opposite of what existed in the First Republic. Parties have no ideology. Manifestos means nothing. Politicians decamp without shame because there is no philosophical line to cross. Power became the only principle, survival became the only strategy, and governance slowly turned into a competition for access, not a competition for ideas. And the regions themselves show the scars of everything that was destroyed. In the north, Sir Ahmadu Bello's education project collapsed completely. The region that once pushed a massive modernization agenda is now a home to millions of out-of-school children. Over 90% of the country's menial workforce still come from the same region Sir Ahmadu Bello tried to lift. The human capital gap he fought to close is now wider than ever. In the West, Awolowo's economic engine stopped running. Cocoa died. Regional revenue died. Innovation died. What replaced it was a total dependence on federal allocation. The region still produces talent, but the opportunity to retain that talent no longer exists. Japa became the escape route, and the West became the epicenter of Nigeria's brain drain. Young professionals leaving not because they hate the country, but because the country stopped rewarding effort. And in the East, Opara's miracle economy never returned. The civil war crushed the regional structure, and the rebuilding that followed focused on survival, not development. The literacy rate is high. The people are hardworking, but the opportunities are few. And because of that imbalance, the region became overrepresented in the cybercrime economy, a global stain that has nothing to do with culture and everything to do with a structural collapse. So when people say Nigeria is a failed state, it is not an insult, it is a diagnosis. The country fell once in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but never stood back up. Centralization remained, oil dependence remained, the party system hollowed out, the economy shifted from production to survival. What you see today is not the failure of one government. It is the long shadow of decisions made decades ago, decisions that broke the foundation that once made Nigeria the hope of Africa.